So the great transformation is evolving at an exponential pace and impacting almost every industry in every country. And that speed combined with the breadth is really what earns it that title of the great transformation. Let's look at it in context. In every period of transformation, jobs have been lost, but other jobs have been created. People went from agriculture into the factories, from the factories into the service industries. And if you look at this slide, what stands out is the magnitude of the bar. A much larger amount of jobs will be impacted per year than in previous eras of disruption. And the question is, if all of these jobs are being automated, if they are being lost, first, how many new jobs will be created? And second, what is the distribution of these new jobs geographically? If we're losing a ton of jobs in Wisconsin and the new jobs are being created in California, in Massachusetts, in India, in Ukraine, then the net benefit to us obviously is disastrous. So we need to learn to prepare ourselves for this great transformation. Let me make this, I see Mary, you have a question? Mary, you raised your hand. Did you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, all right. So let's make this a little bit real here in terms of the impact on Wisconsin. There's a study by Oxford University, The Future of Employment, and they took thousands of jobs and they disaggregated those jobs to see what are the activities that people actually perform in those jobs. And then they took each activity and estimated, based on what they know about a range of technologies, what's the likelihood that that activity could be automated. And when you put that information back together, you have the likelihood of automation for any given job. And if you then take the job mix of a region or of a state, you can come up with these statistics here. So currently we have 2.8 million jobs in Wisconsin. Based on this research, over the next 10 to 20 years, up to 54% of what makes up these jobs could be subject to automation. But that would take us down to 1.52 million residual jobs. Now, of course, there will be new jobs that will be created. So the message is not that we'll be left with 1.38 million jobs. That would be the residual. There will be more jobs, but just think about the magnitude of impact. If 1.5 million jobs will be impacted with a high degree of automation, that means people have to change career tracks, they have to relearn. So there's massive impact that's coming at us. Now, in a pre-COVID environment, there was maybe a little bit of a positive spin on that, which was if we are all struggling for talent, maybe this will help take off some of the talent pressure, at least in the early stages of automation. Now, of course, we have a very different situation. And the question now is, will some of the people who have lost their jobs not be able to come back to their jobs because companies are now accelerating the deployment of technologies to reduce some of the vulnerabilities that they've observed during this crisis? Here is a very critical website. It's called willrobotstakemyjob.com. And I believe that every person, every parent, every leader, every educator should be aware of this website and should share it with others. You can basically enter any job here. Sometimes it's not an exact match, but you should be able to find something that is close enough. And it will tell you the likelihood of automation. It'll also give you some additional information, such as how many people have that job, what's the growth potential, what is the earnings potential, and so forth. I did this with a group of students at UWGB last year, and one young lady was very quick, and then she sort of screamed out, and I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, I entered insurance underwriter. That's what I'm planning to be when I graduate in a couple of months. And it's telling me that the likelihood of automation is 98%. And then she fell into a very somber tone and said, you know, why didn't anybody tell me? And that is my point. If we have an understanding, at least of the likelihood of change that is out there, we ought to start thinking about what does that mean for education choices that our children are making? What does that mean for current students who are halfway or almost all the way through their current studies? What does that mean for employers? How do employers prepare their current workforce for these anticipated changes? But it's a very tangible piece of information around which you can have that dialogue. All right, so let me pause here for a moment. Are there any questions regarding the definition of the Great Transformation or how it might impact us sort of at a broader scale? And if you are on mute, you may have to take yourself off of mute to ask that question. All right, I'm hearing none. Feel free throughout to ask questions. This is really meant to serve your informational needs. So happy to entertain any questions. All right, so now I want to take you into 4 categories of impact. First, impact on our daily lives, then some impacts on business, how we move things around, and ultimately the evolution of learning and education, which should be very close to your hearts. I am selective. This is by no means a comprehensive overview because we only have 60 minutes. So let's start with the impact on our daily lives. Here's my first change hypothesis. A digital world will mirror our physical world, and data will be the new gold. The first part of that sentence may sound like a science fiction movie. If you go back to movies like Tron or The Matrix, right, there's almost this idea that everything in the physical world has a digital representation. And we are moving towards that because sensors exist in buildings, in roads, in devices. Cameras are capturing what's happening in the world. We are communicating what we are doing through our iPhones. We let Google or Apple know where we are, how fast we are moving, what we're looking at, and so forth. So that information is being generated everywhere in the world around us. And that network of information generation is becoming closer and closer, and it mirrors the physical world. It also happens inside of factories where every machine has multiple sensors and is sharing basically its performance record. And that is the concept of the Internet of Things. We used to have things that you could plug in to charge them or plug in to have them function, and then you would use them. But you had to go through all sorts of hoops to get that information out. You had to maybe put the information on a disk or on a cassette and replay it in a different device. Or the device, frankly, had no communication capabilities at all. It was a refrigerator, and a refrigerator kept things cool. Then the first smart devices came about, a refrigerator that would tell you when to change the air filter, what is the temperature that it's operating at, and you can change that temperature, or a TV that was actually connected. Then came smartphones, right? So devices are getting smarter and smarter, and usually what that means is they have several sensors embedded in them, and they are able to communicate the information that is being captured through these sensors, share that information with an outside mechanism, or even receive information from the outside. So that is the concept of the Internet of Things. It is no longer just people communicating with each other via the internet, but devices based on preset rules are also communicating with each other. Here's a list of devices. The blue column might be devices you have at home. Obviously, we have our PCs and laptops, and they are all Wi-Fi enabled or plugged into a LAN system. We have our smartphones, Fitbits, TVs, and so forth. And that list extends beyond the private space into the business space. I mentioned earlier, factories, buildings have extensive sensors, cameras for security and for other reasons, robots, machines, and increasingly all of these elements are connected to each other. And then you have the public space. We have traffic signals, and we're all driven crazy if we drive down a road and we have to keep stopping and keep stopping. And like, why don't they synchronize these lights so we can go in one swoop? Well, that's one stage of devices communicating with each other and responding to external information. There are also some more troublesome developments. There's an experiment in China where they are capturing on all public places in a city the information. And they have a facial recognition software that identifies who is the citizen that we are observing there, what are they doing. And in the same way as we are getting dinged on our driving record if we speed and get caught, people in that city basically get negative entries into their record if they do things that are not allowed. And so if you have too many entries in your record, you might lose privileges. And I was sharing that at the immersion day, and one of our faculty said that it goes further than that based on his understanding. Even if you have friends that have a negative record, that reflects poorly on yourself. So this is a very Orwellian world that we're moving to. The mere fact that the world is being digitized is neutral, but what is happening with that digitization can be either good or bad. There's no value judgment in connecting the world per se. Here are some devices that you may have. I like the Roomba, or intelligent vacuum cleaner. When I ask people, do you know what it does? They say, duh, it picks up the crumbs from my floor. And I'm said, yeah, of course it does. But do you know how it does that? Do you know that it creates a hyper detailed map of your home, which allows it to move around more efficiently? And do you know that it records where exactly it finds those crumbs, and it shares all that information with the company that made it? And presumably that is all for purposes of efficiency, but from that profile of information that is being captured by your vacuum cleaner, people can essentially also discern how you live in your home. When are you home? Where do you eat? Where do you drop crumbs and so forth? So this little robot actually captures a lot of your habits and your work environments, maybe without you knowing it. Now, today we have a situation where most of these devices in our home are connected individually. Our TV is connected, and we have maybe Alexa, and we have the lights, and maybe Alexa can already control the TV and the lights, but then we have the Roomba, and we might have the electric lawnmower and the security cameras. The future is that all of these devices communicate in some part with each other, but more importantly, with a central intelligence that they're going to share a common language. And that intelligence will then begin to learn our habits. When are we coming home each day of the week? How does that change over the course of the year? What is it that we like to do Monday nights, Tuesday mornings? When do we use our coffee maker, and so forth and so forth? And over time, the house will then basically take over more and more of these mundane activities, so we can focus on just living and enjoying the environment, as opposed to finding the remote for every device and setting it to our preferences. So the matrix, this vision of the all-controlling device, is not a reality yet. But with this plethora of data being out there, the ability to collect and analyze that data is what is creating value. There's a new company that's out there that has collected billions of images of people from public sources. And they are now developing facial recognition algorithms based on that information, and they are renting out this capability to intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies, and making millions, if not billions of dollars from that. And it is all data that we posted. We put it as free information, free data, onto social media or other sources up in the internet. The second hypothesis here is that interacting with this digital world will occur largely through non-human interfaces. So a simple interface is a chatbot. A chatbot typically has a limited functionality. It comes standard today with many websites. It can help you answer questions. It can maybe make some simple transactions for you. If it's a travel website or a financial website, it can give you maybe even some insight into the patterns of your financial behavior, like Erica from Bank of America. But they're typically fairly simple, and you have to ask the question in a certain way that it's for it to be understood. And so they are helpful. You don't have to speak to a person, you don't have to wait for a person, but they are limited. The next generation will be conversational AI. It's the same idea as the chatbot, but it will be smarter. It will be trained to accept questions in many formats. It will have a deeper understanding of language. So people ask for the same concept in many different ways, and it will be able to still extract that meaning behind it. There's also going to be a migration from written language to spoken language, so it will feel more human-like. My 5-year-old loves to talk to Siri, and he wants all sorts of things from Siri. Hey Siri, can you remove the block from the iPad, or can you turn on this and can you turn on that? To him, there's a person on the other side, because she responds with a natural language. Ray Kurzweil believes that chatbots in this new iteration will be indistinguishable from humans by 2029. Now that may seem far out right now. We may actually get much closer to that, and maybe even in a shorter amount of time. Now here's an ironic piece of information. In the Wall Street Journal, they reported that people are now being hired to pretend to be a chatbot. And why is that? Many users actually have a preference to speak to a chatbot rather than to a human. They don't want to be sold, they don't want to be influenced, they just want that machine interaction. But because the chatbots are still limited, they now have sort of a second line of defense. And as opposed to saying, hey, you know, I am Ollie, your little chatbot, I cannot answer your questions, I will transfer you to a human. The human just basically comes in on the back end, does not identify themselves, continues the conversation as Ollie, so that the user has a good experience and walks away and says, wow, you know, that was really great. Now, of course, they have to learn how to speak and act like a chatbot, recognizing that they have more knowledge and more flexibility in their actions. So I find that to be ironic, that chatbots were replacing humans, and now humans are being hired to amplify the abilities of chatbots, but they're not allowed to identify themselves as humans. The next hypothesis is that machines in various forms will also increasingly enter our physical and social interactions. So this is an example of robotic bartending. These robots get the drinks exactly right every single time. Now, they don't look very much like a bartender. They look like an industrial robot built for precision. Well, we could give them a human voice. We could maybe even give them sort of the appearance of a more human-like robot. But the point is, they are taking over what previously was performed, or a function that was previously performed by a human. The same could be true for waitstaff. Now here you see this robot looks a little bit more humanoid with arms and a head. And when I first saw that, I was like, you know, what's really the appeal of a robot bringing out the food? But then I played it through. So this robot might come to the table and might engage with me. Hey, Oliver, here's your order. This is what you ordered. I see you brought 2 young people with you. Are those your kids? Hey kids, what are your names, right? And my kids would spill the guts. They would tell this robot everything. 6 months later, I'm in a different restaurant in a different city, same franchise though, and here comes the robot. And because all that data is shared within the network, the robot would say, hey Oliver, thanks for visiting us in blah, blah, blah town today. I see you didn't bring your kids. Are you on a business trip? They might even comment on what I'm eating. I personally would be freaked out by that, but my kids would love it. Already, I cannot take them to a restaurant that doesn't have an interactive pad on the table that they can play with. But if there was a restaurant that had a robot, that would be the only place they would want to go eat. So we are sometimes underestimating what these machines can do because it's no longer just a mechanical task. It is mechanical, cognitive, interactive communication, even with hints of social. So let's get into that social. In Japan, they have a significant problem in that there's a lot of old people, and if they need help, there's really not enough young people to properly take care of them. So what do? We give grandma a little toy. That may sound cruel, but it is actually not cruel at all because this toy is very smart. It can, for one, download the social media history of grandma, however far back that goes. It listens to grandma. It starts to build a gapless track record of everything she says. It can connect that information to outside information. It can have sensors. If grandma is wearing a Fitbit, it can monitor her health, her medical status. It can alert authorities, and it is a source of connectivity. If grandma says, oh, I miss my friend Julie from high school, I haven't spoken to her in 20 years, the little robot might say, well, would you like to speak to her right now? Because I could see that she's connected to her little robot. And boom, there grandma speaks to her Julie, her friend Julie, and she might not even have had the phone number. This is also being used to mitigate the onset of Alzheimer's, to keep people engaged in conversations as opposed to having them just sit and stare out the window. And some of these robots are large enough that they can even lift up a person and carry them or take them out of bed, because we will have 70-year-olds taking care of 100-year-old parents, and they will not have the physical capabilities to take care of them. If you go to the other end of the age spectrum, we may have learning companions for children, best buddies, programmed to be a friend, maybe even monitor what the children are looking at, making sure the children go to bed on time, answering questions. You know, it's like the same way my son is talking to Siri right now. If he had a companion like that, oh boy, they would be talking to each other the whole time. It would be hard for me to break into that. But with that also comes security concerns. What if somebody could hack into that trusted friend and now manipulate the child to do something unsafe? So with all the possibilities come risks that need to be mitigated. Ultimately, the barriers between man and machine will begin to soften, whether that is machine strength that we acquire through exoskeletons. Delta Airlines is deploying this now in Atlanta and is going to bring it to other airports for their luggage handlers so they can lift luggage all day long without straining their backs. Other companies are using this because, you know, they could either invest in very expensive industrial robots, but then these robots have to be pre-programmed, or they just give their existing workers who already know what needs to be done more strength. And so maybe they don't actually need these robots. This is now obviously the ultimate fusion of man and machine. This is no longer just a prosthetic arm, but it basically aims to decode the signals that our brain sends to our muscles or to our extremities. Facebook just invested $1 billion in a company that reads those neural signals. And the ultimate goal is to create this mind-machine connection. You think it, the machine can understand it and can act accordingly. And obviously, if this person can indeed think an action and the arm or whatever extremity it is can execute that, that brings back a whole lot of quality of life for that individual. This is something I saw in Las Vegas. Again, blurring the boundary between man and machine, this time not so much in the physical world, but in the virtual world. You walk up to these screens and at first you think you're watching a video. Crystal clear, high definition, looks like a real human being. Then you realize you can actually talk to that person. So now you wonder if there's somebody behind the screen, or if this is some kind of a trick where what you're saying is relayed by a camera, until you realize this is a digital rendering of a person. It's not a real person, it is programmed. And the visual effects are already hyper-realistic. The communication aspects are still a little bit clunky, but they will get there, they will get better. And so in the future, we could see that maybe people on TV, maybe the newscaster, the weatherman, maybe even the late night comic, because you can make these things funny, are no longer real people. And maybe we will actually come to appreciate them because they don't age, they don't go away. And for the TV stations, this is a boon because they don't have to pay them millions of dollars, and they never say anything inappropriate. There's no scandals. So we're going to live in a world where humans, machines, virtual avatars are going to live together. And I believe that these robots or these chatbots will become part of our social structures, maybe even our family structures, in the same way as we have pets today, and many of us treat them like family members. That little robot or that helper robot, if it has the social capabilities and the communication capabilities, and it has the memory of all that we have experienced that we share with it, I think it will almost be like a family member. This is like Robin Williams, the Bicentennial Man. All right, any questions on impacts of these technologies on our daily lives?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please, Craig.
How important is the decentralization of authority going to be?
So that's a very good question, right? Today, much of the ownership of data rests in the hands of a few companies, right? You have Google, you have Facebook, you have Amazon, and they are accumulating a lot of that information. In our country here in the United States, we as consumers don't have really a strong handle. We cannot really see our Facebook data or ask for it to be deleted. That is different in Europe, where they are passing laws now that would give you more rights as a consumer. If I think of myself, my financial data is with my financial institutions, my medical data is with health providers, but I don't really have a hold on all of that data. I have to sort of store it in a bunch of, in my file cabinet and in a bunch of sources. So there's some technology emerging that aims at changing that paradigm, giving us control of that data. It's called self-sovereign identity. In Estonia, for example, the government has moved to a decentralized concept of data ownership, where each citizen owns their data. And when you have business with the government or the government wants something from you, you create a temporary permission to access that data. We are far away from that right now. I said earlier, data is the new gold. And right now, pretty much all of the gold is being accumulated in the hands of very few. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at changes in the way we do business. So this is not really a shocking hypothesis. Automation will accelerate in search of productivity, competitiveness, and removing vulnerabilities. Automation has always aimed to do that, but I believe COVID-19 is going to be a little bit of a sort of a signal to many companies where they realize, wow, we really have vulnerabilities that we were not aware of. We thought that having all of our people together in one place was an asset because it eases communication, teamwork, and so forth. And now all of a sudden we find it to be a vulnerability. We thought that global supply chains, sourcing materials from all over the world, was an asset because it helped us save expenses. And now it shows us how vulnerable that makes us to disruptions in those supply chains, or even the transmission of diseases as people move along those supply chains. So what are some examples of this acceleration? Again, this chart, I used it very differently in a pre-COVID environment, right? If everybody is struggling to hire talent, if we can't find workers and we're just stealing them from each other, well, if we could find a way of making our current workers more productive, then that's actually a positive value proposition. That's a promise. And you can see that the productivity potential here across industries varies. but it is very significant in some industries. And if we can capture this productivity potential, for example, in manufacturing, then the incentive of moving manufacturing jobs offshore is greatly reduced. Now, the paradigm has flipped. Now, with so many people out of work, if we are capturing this productivity potential, essentially it means that companies may not have to rehire the same amount of workers as before the crisis. And if they are in fact moving forward in addressing their vulnerabilities, this may lead to extended unemployment over periods of time. Stationary robots have been with us for a while. You know, these industrial robots are multi-axial, so they can move in different directions. They may have cameras and other sensors. They can actually detect the piece that they are picking up. It doesn't have to be exactly in the right spot, but typically there's a cage around them. They are not meant to work with humans. They are replacing humans. The next generation, and you can see here that the distribution of these robots varies greatly. Japan, by far, has the highest penetration of these robots. And again, it makes sense because they don't have enough young people to fulfill all of these mundane tasks. So they're letting machines do the work. So just imagine now, if this level of robotic automation were to be extended to the United States, it's more than threefold. Or if you look at the rest of the world, right? So the automation potential is enormous, as evidenced by where some of the leaders are on that. And that just, again, raises that specter of how many jobs could be impacted by this. This is going to be the next generation of robots called cobots. They are not designed to sort of, hack up and down in the most efficient manner, but they are designed to work with people. This robot still performs a task, but if it touches a human, it'll actually pull back. It'll stop the task. This particular example here is a stationary robot without advanced sensors, but you could also have a mobile robot, and you could equip that robot with visual sensors. You could equip that robot with communication capabilities, so you can tell it what to do, and it'll execute those tasks. There'll be a new generation of information interfaces, and it will revolutionize many professions. I'm going to focus today on augmented reality. What is that? It's a technology that superimposes a computer-generated image on our view of the real world. If any of you played Pokemon Go or you watched somebody play it, that was an example of augmented reality. You catch little monsters seemingly in the real world, but obviously they're not really in the real world. An example would be you look at your actual car, but you look at it through your iPhone, your iPad, whatever device you have, and you see additional information. If you are in the Hyundai app, it'll tell you how to maybe perform an oil change. It'll give you additional information. Or in maintenance, a technician could have step-by-step instructions how to take apart or how to reassemble a machine, how to find errors, information that would otherwise not be available to them. You can apply it in commerce to redesign store layouts, and it could play a big role in shopping. You could superimpose what a dress, a piece of clothing, a suit looks like on a person without actually having to try it on. You can vary it in sizes and colors, and if you smile, the camera will recognize that you're smiling and add that to your wish list. Or if you have programmed the mirror that way, it will just order it on Amazon and you'll have it a couple hours later or maybe a day later. We'll talk about that in a moment. Another concept of augmented reality is not to look through your device, but to wear these augmented reality glasses. They're still a little expensive, so they are not widely adopted, but the idea is to give the power of a computer to people who need to work with their hands. If we sit in an office typing away, we're fine. But if you are a mechanic out in the field and you have a screwdriver in one hand and some other device or part in the other hand, you can't go back and forth between typing or searching and doing that. So you have to rely on another way of seeing that incremental information, and so it's being projected into your field of vision. This could be applied, for example, for doctors. You use the MRI information that was gathered from a patient, you superimpose it onto their body, to plan that surgery in detail. It could also be used in training because these devices also have a camera. You have your best technician or engineer perform a high-risk procedure. They record it, and then you superimpose additional information, step-by-step instructions, so it can become a training video or sort of a live walkthrough for those who are not as skilled in performing a certain procedure. Third category is how we move things around. So change hypothesis here, the movement of goods along the supply chain will be highly automated. This is an image of Amazon's fulfillment center down in Kenosha. When I think of a warehouse, I typically think of more of a Home Depot, and this is everything but a Home Depot. These little orange things are robots, and they are moving around the shelves. And the shelves are randomly stocked. It's not that one item is in a certain section. All the items are randomly stocked, but the AI knows where everything is. And if you order something, the little robot may already be on its way to retrieve that item, bring it to the picking station where it's put into the box. And then little devices like that may roll through the neighborhood. Somebody sent me a picture of one of those crossing the street in Madison. It was not an Amazon one, but it was a University of Wisconsin one. So these things are real. They are on the roads performing some of these delivery tasks. And Amazon's ultimate vision, they have a patent on this, is that they would get away from these fulfillment centers on the ground and trucks bringing the goods to you. But they would have a fleet of blimps basically carrying high frequency items above the cities, and then drones just drop out of the sky and deliver them. And that's how you get from next day delivery to next hour delivery. We may also see entirely new formats of retail. We have some food deserts today in our cities. But if we have these new concepts of what shopping really means, you basically shop it from a machine, and another machine brings that machine, replaces it at night, and it gets restocked with fresh produce in a factory overnight. Right? That's an entirely different concept of how retail functions. And what is being moved could also shift. So we always assume that we can automate the supply chain, but what if we could completely disrupt the supply chain by producing what we need on site? In that, this is an example of 3D printing, where basically an object is being printed out of a single material or multiple materials. It could be a house that is being printed out of cement, and there are many applications, increasing number of materials that can be 3D printed, which means you don't have to ship the finished good anymore at all. You ship the raw materials. That's an entirely new definition of supply chain. And of course, we will move around differently, whether it's going to be flying cars or we're going to be in Elon Musk's underground tube to get from place to place. It's a little less predictable, but the concepts are moving towards higher level of autonomy and maybe away from individually used and individually owned modes of transportation to shared modes of transportation. Now, of course, coronavirus could put a big question mark on that concept of shared transportation and give a big boost back to individual transportation, because we don't want to be around other people when we move from place to place. The final chapter is the impact or the evolution of learning and education. So change hypothesis here, the need for education and training will far exceed current capacities. I recall a conversation with a few folks at UWGB over a year ago before I took this position. And I said, how many students do you guys currently have? And the answer was about 8,000. And I said, what would it take to serve 100,000 students? And there was sort of a chuckle going through the room, like this was a big joke. And I said, no, I'm really not joking. Of course you can't serve 100,000 traditional students who are coming in for 2-year degree, 4-year degree, live on campus or something like that. But we're going to have millions of people looking for new skills, having to look for new skills. And who's going to serve them? If we don't build our share of the capacity to serve all these people, well, somebody else will. So it was actually meant to be a more serious question. If you think about the spectrum of people looking for education or reskilling in the future, it is vast. It's not just students with a technology focus who need computer programming, data skills, and so forth. It is every student, like that young lady who was about to graduate to be an insurance underwriter. She's going to need new incremental skills. And that's part of the work I'm doing with faculty at UWGB to look at the course content, look at what's currently being taught, and figure out how can we incorporate additional knowledge about some of these disruptive technologies into those courses. And then we have members of the workforce, either people who are specifically seeking to update or upgrade their skills and they can stay in their current tracks, or people who are being pushed into new tracks because their entire activity is being automated. There will be no more bank tellers, or there will be no more bartenders, or a much smaller amount of bartenders. What jobs will they take? And who's going to help them acquire those new skills? Are the universities and technical colleges going to be involved in that? And then finally, corporate and business leaders, community influencers, entrepreneurs. Not all of them are going to come back for an MBA-like program. What programs can we put on for them to build the awareness? Because if they don't become aware, if they don't become change ready, all of what's on the left-hand side is not going to happen in Wisconsin. It's going to happen in other places, and we will lose our competitive edge. There will be new formats of learning and training, whether it is augmented reality to make training more interactive and engaging, virtual reality to transport children away to faraway places, but let them experience those places, maybe even different languages. Having teachers interact with students that may or may not be physically present in the classroom. Teaching assistants or teachers that are represented in the classroom, but through a robot. Like, the doctor might be using this as a telemedicine device. It could also be a teleteaching device, or learning from little robots who are just, stocked with information and willing to relay that to the person asking questions. And it's not just going to be in the academic context. Walmart purchased 12,000 of these virtual reality headsets to train their customer service representatives. And they train them from active shooter scenarios all the way to identifying customer needs as customers walk in. You can prepare someone for a scenario by having them see it, over and over, and then they perform it much better on the job. There's going to be a more diverse portfolio of options. I mentioned earlier, if we are not ready, somebody else will. Blended education, that is factually happening already now. Through COVID, everything had to move online as opposed to being on campus. Massive open online courses with 10,000 people enrolled. Some big issues around success rates right now, because not everybody is actually able to go through that. Micro-credentials, why do we need 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees? Why does it take an entire semester to complete a course? What if we had a definition of skills that was much more granular? And again, UWGB is beginning to issue credentials in coming semesters. And there are new learning platforms, and some of them have been created by multiple top universities bonding together. The what of education will require a paradigm shift. There's an initiative called Skillful. It started in Colorado, and its goal is to get employers, educators, and individuals away from this resume view or the hiring mentality of you need to have a certain degree. It is instilling the idea of if you have the skills to perform the job, you should be hired. So let's write resumes in that manner of what are my skills. Let's write job descriptions in that manner of what are my skills. And let's have skill building programs at the universities, at the colleges, and maybe from the government side that build the required skills. And then there are some of these learning platforms that I mentioned, Singularity, Udacity, Coursera, some very powerful alternatives to the traditional university systems that are emerging. One concept that I find fascinating is from Professor Aoun, Northeastern University. He calls it humanics, and not only is it the mode of learning that is changing, but his hypothesis is that all of us will need to acquire 3 literacies in the future: data literacy, technology literacy, and human literacy. Today, we can acquire some of that, but typically, if we are more a data science student, we get a lot of the first, some of the second, very little of the third. If we are in a humanities course or degree program, we get a lot of the third, very little of the first 2. How do we allow and facilitate access for people to all of that? Here's an example. There is a fully developed free data literacy program offered by Click. They are a database software provider, and they've gone through the pain of saying, okay, you know, if we need more data savvy people, let's not rely on others to make people data savvy, but let's put it out there. Let's have a completely developed curriculum. What we're doing here is building technology literacy, allowing you to understand the basic concepts. Now, we're not teaching you to program in Python or anything like that, but it starts with the basics. It starts with literacy, and then you go beyond. And when it comes to human literacy, this is again back to the World Economic Forum. Some of the top skills that they are putting out there are things like complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity. If the machines are getting better at so many things, we as humans have to get better at the things that the machines cannot yet do. And some of these concepts represent that. Now, when I asked, are there classes at UWGB on these topics? The answer was yes, there are. But you have to be, in most cases, enrolled in a humanities degree in order to have access to these classes. So how could we take that and make it accessible for a broader audience? So my final pitch here, my final closing statement is, this is not far away sort of futurist talk. If we don't begin to prepare as an institution, as individuals, as organizations, we are at risk of becoming the digital Rust Belt in Wisconsin. And I personally have chosen to make my home in Wisconsin. I would like my kids to grow up in an environment of opportunity and not know that at some point they're going to have to leave to go somewhere else to get the education they need to be future ready. So the premise is, if that big wave is coming, we all have to get ready. We need to learn the basic skills to navigate that wave, to ride that wave.